The crystalline autumn wind carried the fresh smell of water as Isaac Turner walked along the deck. He looked over the railing as the ship floated down the Detroit River. There was a chill in the air, and he wanted to go below deck for a jacket. But first he decided to check on the young guy. He looked down the length of the more than 700-foot truck and tried to find his charge. Before he saw Jimmy, he saw something else that brought a smile to his lips. There, on the shore of Belly Island, a jewel in the center of the river between Detroit, Michigan, USA, and Windsor, Ontario, Canada, he saw them. There was a group of small children there, all waving as best they could at the ship as it passed by. The group of smiling children's faces brought a smile to Isaac's wind-worn face as he watched them. He knew that at that moment each of these children wanted to be on the ship. Tomorrow their thoughts would return to music, monsters, and video games. But for that one moment when the ship passed by, that was their only focus. That's the beauty of children. Isaac knew this from experience because he had two of his own. They put their soul into everything they did. If only adults could do the same. "Hey, Ike, who are you waving to?" Jimmy asked, coming up behind Isaac. "Just a bunch of kids out there on the beach," Isaac said. "Why bother?" Jimmy asked. "I probably made their day just by being polite," Isaac said. "Besides, what you show up for is what you see. You never know. One of these kids might grow up to be our next shipmate or next owner. I always try to treat people the way I would like to be treated. Me. The bad things you do usually come back to you. Good things, too." Jimmy nodded his head and shivered from the cold. It was really cool today, even for late October in Michigan. But at least there was no snow. Michigan had all 4 seasons. The weather in the state is also subject to sudden and violent changes. There was an old saying in Michigan, "If you don't like the weather, just wait 10 minutes and it will change." The ship on which they both worked as sailors was called Bill Maitland. His identification and vessel number was DQS-1. It was 729 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 38 feet high. The ship carried iron ore to ports in Michigan and Wisconsin. At this moment, in fact, there were almost 26,000 tons of pellets in its belly that would soon become cars and trucks. "Damn, it's cold in here," Jimmy snapped. This was his 3rd trip on the ship, and he was used to it. Sometimes he liked to show off his knowledge of things on the ship so that the old people wouldn't think he was still green. "If I didn't know better, I'd swear the weight of—" The rest of Jimmy's sentence was cut off so quickly by Isaac's hand over his mouth that Jimmy felt like he had swallowed the rest of the sentence. "Shut up, boy," Isaac hissed angrily. "You never mention her anywhere near the lakes. Especially don't talk about it in October and November. Do you understand me?" Isaac looked so intensely into Jimmy's eyes that he felt afraid. Jimmy knew that sailors, or navigators, as they were now called, because there were very few ships now, were indeed very superstitious people. These superstitions seemed to increase on the Great Lakes. But despite all the new technology and modern equipment, Jimmy did not expect that anyone really believed in all these old stories. Maybe it's just a generational difference. Isaac was about 50 and Jimmy was 24, more than a generation apart. They had virtually no common life experiences that could unite them. In fact, the only thing they had in common was that they were both sailors on DQS-1. Otherwise, their lives were completely different. When Jimmy met a new woman at every port, his friend Isaac had been married to the same woman, Tina, for longer than Jimmy had been alive. Their relationship was often turbulent, and there were many occasions when Jimmy had to calm Isaac down. Almost everyone on the ship knew about Isaac and his wife's battles. This is why Jimmy did not see himself in the role of settling the relationship until he left the sea. Maintaining a stable relationship is simply too difficult when you spend weeks apart. Isaac claimed that they stayed together because they loved each other. But Jimmy, having listened to the couple's almost constant battles, often wondered what love had to do with it. Isaac also adhered to many of the superstitious practices that had long been part of maritime folklore. Jimmy, on the other hand, was not religious or superstitious. He did not believe in anything that he could not see, feel, or taste. Even most of the things he could hear could be explained scientifically. One of his favorite shows to watch whenever he could on the internet was Ghostbusters, which showed that many things that people thought were supernatural were actually very easily explained. So Jimmy just laughed internally at his friend's absolute fear at the mention of the witch. Witch, thought Jimmy. Witch, witch, witch. Fuck the witch, Jimmy said, very quietly, as Isaac walked away. Although Jimmy's words were almost wordless and too quiet to be heard by human ears, they still echoed through the water of the river and became part of it. Being part of the river, they became part of Lake Huron, into which it flows. Jimmy's words were carried across the St. Mary's River and Sulak to Lake Superior. Lake Superior, by surface area, is the largest freshwater lake in the world. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Gordon Lightfoot wrote about Gitchagumia, meaning big water. Whatever you call it, Lake Superior is big and scary. In the depths of the lake there are places where the water freezes most of the year. Local superstitions stated that lakes and their sisters were all living things with spirits and personalities. There were legends surrounding the lakes of their abilities. In Jimmy's case, the problem wasn't the 10,000-year-old lake. The problem was something much younger, but at the same time, much older. Deep in the center of the lake, in one of the coldest parts of it, in an area called the Lake Ice Mansions, waves of Jimmy's words caressed his body. Simply touching the water, saturated with words, was enough. The creature began to move, and its eyes opened, a strangely icy blue color. The thin hand waved, and the wind along the surface of the lake rose, creating a whirlpool that pierced the depths of the lake. The rapidly rotating current did not go unnoticed by Superior herself. In a voice as deep and watery as the ocean, Superior said, "Go back to sleep, little sister. Your time has not come yet." The wind howled in response to the lakey, even as the whirlpool cleared a path for the body to reach the surface of the water. Something is calling to me, and I must answer. The force of the wind increased until the body, exhausted but swollen with water, rose to the surface and remained floating above the water. Thunder rang out and lightning struck the water. The winds rose to hurricane force in a very narrow arc around the body. The vacuum and friction from the wind sucked all the water out of the body. Lake water acted as a preservative, keeping the body fresh. As the body dried, air penetrated into it. The body has become the home of the wind consciousness. In some strange sense, the body became a vessel for the wind. This allowed the wind to interact with beings and objects on the mortal plane while remaining connected to the ethereal plane on which she and her cousins, the lake spirits, existed. Wind and lakes could always influence people, places, and things on both planes, but they had no knowledge of the results nor motivation for their actions on this one. Her sister Superior often sank ships and killed many without realizing it. The body, whose consciousness was now that of the wind, smiled as it thought about it. She shook her head vigorously, so much so that if she were still human, her neck would be crushed. Her eyes sparkled with unnatural fire and purpose. She still had thoughts in her head that belonged to the original consciousness that this body contained. This man had been dead for over 30 years in human time. She was surprised that she could still remember the man's name. It was November. The people, those fragile, useless little creatures, called her the November Witch. They knew her only from the storms she brought, awakening every year at this time. They knew so little. For the past 31 years, she has had her purpose among them. It's surprising that no one has figured it out yet. November looked around her and felt herself being drawn towards the shore. The call came from outside, beyond Gitche-Gumi, where the waters of Huron flowed. She felt this call very strongly and what it promised. But first, she needed a snack. Fuck the witch, really. Clifford Darden slid out from under the back of his 2008 Mustang GT. He was doing some work on the car's suspension. He needed stiffer upper and lower control arms to keep the rear of the pony car from bouncing every time he hit a pothole. The car had a lot of power, but it was difficult to transfer all of it to the road. He wondered why the hell Ford still refused to give the car independent rear suspension. Heck, most of them already come with a limited center differential, so why the hell do they still use a rear axle that is essentially a beam with a wheel on each end? Realistically, he didn't care. He loved his car so much that the imperfections of its design seemed to him more characteristic features than flaws. Cliff didn't know a single perfect person. What made him step out from under the car was the sound of another car outside his garage. He knew that most likely it was the arrival of his wife, Ramona. He dried his hands and climbed into the house, only to see an attractive blonde walk up the stairs and head straight into the bathroom adjacent to their bedroom. She's been doing this a lot lately. It seemed like she needed a shower every damn night as soon as she got home. He wondered what she did at her job as a receptionist that was so tiring that she had to shower as soon as she got home. This is not what he signed up for when he married her. He didn't even understand why she needed to work at all. His 6-figure salary was more than enough to support both of them. Ramona's job didn't pay her nearly enough to pay for the clothes he bought her for work. He repeatedly sat down and showed her that in terms of saving money for them, it would be more economical for her to quit her job. The cost of the clothes she needed for work, in addition to her regular clothes, plus the wear and tear on her car and gas costs, were much more than she made. When you factor in the lunches she ate every day at her favorite restaurant, they were losing money on her job. He respected her desire to work and maintain a semblance of economic independence, but this was too much. They had been married for a little less than 2 years, and were already starting to fall apart in bed. They went from having almost weekly sex to where it seemed like she was now only giving him merciful sex once a week. Even that wasn't enough because it seemed like she was just coasting along. Cliff loved Ramona. He immediately fell in love with her just by looking at her. His heart was laid at her feet for her to do with him as she pleased. While Cliff wasn't a troll, he wasn't Romeo either. He expected her to crush his heart and walk away laughing. At least he expected her to give him a gentle and polite refusal and go look for some handsome guy. He was pleasantly surprised when she responded to his interest and affection with visible signs of her own affection. Their courtship was short but intense. They got engaged after just 3 months, got married after 6, and practically went through with divorce 2 years later. This caused him great pain. Lately, Cliff has been getting more affection from his car than from Ramona. He'll probably be ready to confront her in a few days. Somehow, this has to end. Of course, he suspected that she was having an affair at work. He did all the usual things, including hiring a private investigator. The man was supposed to report to him in just a few days. But then what? What will he do if it turns out that she is dating another man? The macho approach would be to immediately throw this bitch out into the cold, throw it on her graceful ass. Maybe he should even become more macho and beat her and whoever she's sleeping with. That would be the John Wayne way to do it. The problem is that he was not John Wayne. Cliff didn't tolerate any nonsense from anyone, but that was real life. He loved Ramona so much that he couldn't imagine life without her, even after just 2 years. He was torn, but he knew that in the end, his only hope was that if he confronted her and played her bluff, she would agree to break up with another man. Spending nights cuddling with Ramona, even when she claimed she was too tired to do anything else, was still better than being alone and better than being with someone else. On the one hand, he wished that Ramona could love him the way he loved her. On the other hand, he wished with all his soul that they would never meet. In any case, this will all end soon. He shrugged and went back to finish working on his car. Ramona Darden stood in the shower after sex at the home she shared with her now husband. She quickly wiped every inch of her body. She thought back to the last 4 hours she'd spent this morning in a motel room, across town, with 3 guys she didn't know. She needed to get herself in order so that clueless Cliff couldn't tell that someone else had her. Ramona loved rough sex, and poor little Cliffy, although an adequate lover, simply didn't have it in himself to give it to her the way she needed it. Cliff's only advantage was his home. It was tucked away in a cute little gated community. It was the perfect place to hide after the insurance fraud she had almost been arrested for shortly before their meeting. Now, 2 years later, No one was still looking for her, and she had almost gained enough access to Cliff's accounts to bleed him out too. When she leaves him in a few days, she will be able to pull out almost $1 million in cash and investments to ease her path to the next scam. What she liked most about Cliff was how damn trusting he was. Her time with him also taught her that insurance fraud and the BE job she cut her teeth on were too dangerous and not lucrative enough. What she did to him was too good to be true. Just find a rich sucker, make him fall in love with her, marry her, hide with him for a while, and then leave him broke. It was simply too easy. Her long, thick blonde hair and large, innocent-looking blue eyes made men go stupid towards her. Her big breasts and round ass made everyone eager for her to shit on them. What neither of them knew was that the fire between her legs burned so intensely that she would still pay them to take what they wanted from her. But what really irritated her was not the guy who was treating her well. She really liked a man who knew what he wanted from her and just fucking took it. All the men she met this afternoon were the same. They didn't waste her damn time trying to get to know her. They didn't even know her name and didn't want her. They took her straight to the motel and forced her to use some of Cliff's money to pay for the room. They then started having sex with her. She was still shaking from the memories of what they had done to her. She returned home from her motel room. She ran to the bathroom to clean up before Cliff saw her. If he had done that, there was no way he would have stayed married to her. There was also the fact that even though she didn't love him, she had feelings for him, and she didn't want him to be hurt unnecessarily. Ramona was not truly capable of love, as most people knew. So in a way, Cliff was the closest to her. She felt the same way about Cliff that most people would feel about a pet. She showed him affection, but would not hesitate to humiliate him if he caused her too much trouble. After finishing her shower, she decided to pamper him a little in the evening. She was a little sore from the day's efforts, but making love would help her relax. "Cliff," she called out to him. She came down the stairs, covered only with a towel, her hair wet and wet. She looked around the house and didn't see him. Where the hell was he? After looking around the house, she realized that she would miss this place. Cliff spent both money and time to ensure her comfort and happiness in the huge ranch house. She truly felt at home. She had never owned a home before, at least not her own. She looked at the photographs scattered on the tables and walls. There were many photos of her and Cliff in different places around the world. They seemed to be truly happy. Only she knew that the memories they shared were only part of her efforts to gain his trust. She heard a slight clunking sound from behind the kitchen and knew where he was. He was in the garage with his second wife. She wondered if he would choose to keep her or the car if he had a choice. "Cliff," she called, opening the door separating the garage from the house. He turned away from some mechanical thing he was working on under the car, and she saw sadness in his eyes. He knew. Her instincts, honed by years of fraud, told her unmistakably that she was the target. She didn't know exactly how much he knew, but he knew something, and they wouldn't last long. "Hey, honey, I've been thinking about you all day," she cooed. "It's been a few days since I'm a little tired," he said, looking back at his car. Now she knew the extent of his knowledge. The pain she saw on his face was jealousy. He suspected that she was mocking him. He'll probably ask someone to follow her. If they looked too closely, they might find something. She'll have to run away tonight. However, at this early stage of the game, she will not receive all the money. She will have to be content with a few $100,000. Luckily, her backup puppy will be home tonight. He was a sailor and could probably take her away if she pressured him. She'd already had sex with him on that huge ship he shouldn't have taken her on. "But baby, you don't want to," she began. She really wanted to try and save it if possible. Her best chance of getting all the money was to convince him to put up with her crap for a few more weeks. Honestly, she didn't want to admit it, but she really wasn't ready for her time with Cliff to end. Yes, he was ignorant, but he loved her unconditionally. She had never had this happen before either. She'll probably miss it more than home. An expression of regret and pain appeared on her face, as if he had caused her great pain. Her performance was so good that she could see that he was starting to give up. Perhaps this time she would even let him take control of her. Everyone else she slept with just took it. So, why not give it to her husband? She almost laughed at that. She walked toward him and let her towel open a little. And then it happened. His cell phone rang. He looked at her apologetically and said, "I have to accept this." Ramona knew Cliff like the back of her hand. She taught him so well that he usually told her everything. If he had a business call, he would not hesitate to discuss it in her presence. But he didn't want to answer that call with her gift. This could only mean one of two possibilities. First of all, he didn't want her to know about it. And secondly, it was directly related to her. Of course, it might have been a surprise that he planned this for her, but it was better to be safe than sorry. She had to assume that he knew about her, and this phone call was not good news for her. She tiptoed towards him, although he turned away from her and covered the phone. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and left the room. She made a big show of closing the door silently behind her and then dropped the pan into the kitchen. The sound echoed throughout the house. She knew he would think she was preparing something to eat. Then she quickly returned to the door, which she had not closed completely, and listened. She heard him talking about photographs and videos. She couldn't make out the entire conversation, but after hearing his point of view, she knew her instincts were right. She returned to the kitchen and made herself a sandwich. When Cliff approached her, she smiled and asked if he wanted something to eat too. "Maybe when I get back," he said. "I need to talk to you about something too, okay?" She nodded her head and smiled. "I like talking to you, honey," she said. "I'll be waiting." Her smile was so bright, and the look she gave him told him that she would do anything for him. He left the house. He got into his Mustang and took off from the garage. Damn it. She wished he drove a different car. She would take him with her in a heartbeat. Before he reached the end of the block, she got dressed and grabbed several of his credit cards, which she hid. He, like many other people, used the same ATM pin on all of his cards. This will make it easier for her to dry them. She put the cards in her purse and then opened the safe. He usually kept between $10,000 and $20,000 in cash there for emergencies. He also had a couple of CDs that could be easily traded. She maxed out all the credit cards, getting cash, and then cashed out the CDs in her next city. She would probably come out of this with about $100,000. It wasn't chicken feed, but she didn't have access to major bank accounts yet. She planned to pretend that she bought him a very expensive car for his birthday. She had already spoken to the man who handled their bank accounts. She was going to make the idiot think she was buying Cliff a Ferrari. This would kill two birds with one stone. The idiot at the bank will get the impression that he is more attractive to her than he was or will be. She might even give him the impression that she could give him something extra for helping her. On the other hand, poor, stupid Cliff would think she was buying him something. He might have thought that she did not know that he had to give the money. By the time the car was supposed to be there, it was long gone. Well, next time, next idiot, she thought. She will really miss him, though. He really loved her, and her heart wasn't completely made of stone. But she'll get through it. They'll both get through it. And in a way, she was doing him a favor. She taught him a very important lesson. He learns that he needs to be much more careful with his money and his heart. Cliff met with his private investigator, Frederick Sanford. "Sit down, Mr. Darden," said Sanford. Fred Sanford was an aging veteran who, after serving in the Army, went into the investigative business. Over the years, he has seen everything. He'd seen men cheat on their wives so often that hunting for strangers was like buying a hamburger. He also saw men who loved the wives who cheated on them so much that even after they caught them, they gave them chance after chance, until it became more of a game of don't ask, don't tell. He was confident that Darden would become one of them. This guy loved this bitch so much it was crazy, but who wouldn't? The woman was hot. Hell, Sanford himself would sleep with her too if he had the chance, and then tell Darden she wasn't doing anything. It would probably be better for the guy anyway. This way, at least he could maintain his self-respect. It wasn't much fun telling this guy that the woman he loved slept with everything that crossed her path. Age, gender, race, appearance, none of it seemed to matter. If it breathes, she will have sex with it. Mr. Darden, I have bad news for you, Sanford said. He put on a professional, sad voice because it made clients think he really felt their pain. In fact, clients paid better when they thought he was sorry for them. Your wife is definitely cheating on you, but the good news is it's not just one special guy. It would be a lot worse, Sanford said. Okay, I'm lost, Cliff said. Wouldn't it be better if it was just one guy? God damn it, a lot worse, Sanford said. If she sleeps with one guy all the time, there are feelings involved. She probably loves him, or even very much. If you put her back against the wall, she might even leave you for him. But if it's multiple guys, then she probably loves you but needs more sex or more excitement or something like that. These things are easy to fix. You might even save your marriage. Then maybe her sex drive is just a lot higher than yours, and instead of hurting your feelings, she just goes out to get what she needs and then comes home to you. How does she treat you when you are together? Asked Sanford. Well, she treats me well, Cliff said. He began to see it completely differently than he had previously thought. Perhaps things are not so simple. She just seems to come alive when I walk into the room. So that's it, Sanford said. Take this folder. Go home and show her the pictures and videos. Scare her. Make her think you want a divorce and get some counseling to help you get over it. Cliff's mood improved significantly as he headed home. Jimmy fell asleep in his bunk to get some sleep after helping the rest of the crew unload most of the cargo. It was hard physical work and very tiring. He had already taken a nap before he called Melissa, his woman in town. She was several years older than him, but she was so cells that it didn't matter. Jimmy also knew that she was married, and he didn't care about that either. He slept with her, not her husband, so it was her husband's business. Even though there was a large crane that lifted most of the cargo, Jimmy and other crew members, as well as trucks from the pier, put in hours of extremely hard work to unload the ship. They moved 13,000 tons of pellets and loaded almost the same weight of uncoated castings. Both the pellets and the rest of the castings will travel to Wisconsin with the ship. They'll be heading to Wisconsin first thing in the morning, so Jimmy will only have the chance to meet Melissa for one night. On the way back, he will stay for 3 days, so maybe they will even have a real date of some kind. But tonight will only be about relieving tension. Jimmy, there's some kind of screen waiting for you, Carl Jones shouted. Carl was another crew member. He had only been aboard the ship a few weeks longer than Jimmy. Carl had a reputation for being cunning. Most of the crew had already decided that he was a pretty normal guy until you trusted him with something you didn't want to lose. Carl also seemed very willing to break any rule he thought he could get around. Do you want me to bring her to your room? Carl shouted. Hell no, Jimmy said. The captain is on shore. What he doesn't know won't hurt him, Carl jokes. Okay, bring her here, Jimmy yawned. 10 minutes later, Ramona, whom Jimmy knew as Melissa, was having sex with him. Ramona was still sore from the men she met at the motel earlier, but did her best to make Jimmy think she was hotter than ever. What Jimmy did to her actually hurt, but she had long ago learned that moans of pain and moans of pleasure sounded very similar, and most men could only perceive what they wanted to hear. He truly believed that she missed him so much that she was waiting for him on the dock when she really needed him to persuade him to take her to Wisconsin that night, or early the next morning. It was clear to her that Cliff would most likely send the police and his private investigator after her because of the stolen money. Although Cliff could afford to lose it, this amount of money would send her to prison for a very long time if she were caught. When Jimmy finished with her and turned over, she pressed herself against him. She immediately noticed that he seemed to move away from her. She immediately realized that, unlike Cliff, Jimmy did not want any intimacy with her. She was just a girl for the night. Now that he had her, Jimmy didn't need her anymore. This put her in a difficult position. She needed a place she could hide and a way to get out of the city at the same time. She should have waited until they were away from the dock to have sex with him. Now she was at his mercy and had virtually nothing to offer other than the promise of more of what he had already received. This made her realize that she had done something very stupid. She left the man who truly loved her with all his heart and soul. What does she have to do with this? She received some money. He always gave her everything she wanted. Cliff was handsome, kind, and rich. What more could you ask for? Unlike the man lying next to her, trying to figure out a way to get rid of her, Cliff melted every time she touched him. She will soon turn 30. She tried to avoid running and hiding from the law for most of her life. Isn't it time for her to get real and give herself all the things that everyone else has? It was too late to change anything, but it was time for her to find her own life and stop stealing pieces from others. "Jimmy, I missed you so much," she lied. Jimmy yawned and looked at his watch. "We better get dressed, honey," he said. "I wouldn't want to be late." "Darling," she thought. "The bastard probably doesn't even remember the name I gave him. It's funny that I don't remember myself." "What's my name, Jimmy?" she asked. He began. She hissed angrily. "Melissa," he answered quickly. "I haven't forgotten. I'm just used to calling you darling." "Jimmy, can I stay with you? I don't want to be away from you for long," she asked, making her voice sound innocent and needy. "I'll see what I can arrange," he said. "You'll have to be very quiet and careful because I could get into serious trouble if we get caught. I don't know how you'll be able to wash yourself or even go to the toilet." "Don't worry about it, Jimmy," she said. "I just want to be with you, okay?" Ramona planned to do what she always did. On a ship full of men, she shouldn't have had any problems. She would seduce some of them into helping her keep the secret and sleep with the rest. They would reach Wisconsin in less than 3 days, even as slowly as the big ship moved, so all she needed was a chance and a place to hide. Jimmy also had his own plans. He liked the idea of having as many girls as he wanted over the next few days. Moreover, he knew that Ramona's husband was rich. If he was nice to her, maybe she could get him a job in something else. Unlike Ike, Jimmy wasn't going to be loading and unloading that ship for the rest of his damn life. "Okay, honey, we'll try. Why don't you pack your things and bring them here? Meet me in 3 hours at the same place where you were waiting for me earlier," he said. "You won't regret it, Jimmy," she whispered enthusiastically. 3 hours was just right. She had already visited the bank and transferred as much money as possible from Cliff's account. Now she just needed to hit as many ATMs as possible until she reached her limit. Add to that the cash she took out and the time deposit accounts, and she was in very good shape. There was a thought in her head. Maybe it's not necessary. He loves you very much. He will forgive you and you can be happy together. She dismissed the thought. It just wasn't her style. She has been running, sneaking, and deceiving people most of her life. Why change now? She wasn't even sure she knew how to live differently. Jimmy walked into a dingy beach bar called Sea Hands. When it came to gambling on the shore, he liked 4 things: drinking, playing games, fighting, and sex. He had already had a drink, so he was looking for an opportunity to do the other 3. He looked around the room and saw a couple of guys playing pool, a few more playing darts, and a few gathered in front of a shabby TV watching a Red Wings game. He was surprised that Detroit, being such a big sports city, had such a diverse sports team as neither New York nor any city in California. The Red Wings were probably the best team in the NHL. The Tigers faced the Rangers in the ALCS to determine who would advance to the World Championship Series. The Lions are off to a surprising start to the year with a 4-0 record. They have won 8 straight regular season games since last year, and 12 in a row if preseason games are included. Michigan and Michigan State played football this weekend. Everywhere you looked, there was big sports action. Only the Pistons sucked. Sea Hands was not a bar that catered to an upscale clientele. The wood was old, the furniture was worn out, the floor was scratched, and there was no food served, only drinks and snacks. Most of their clients were sailors working on the Great Lakes. No one who came here dressed up because women rarely set foot in this bar. Even when they arrived, they were usually either lost or trying to get their drunken husband home. Even in these 2 situations, they left as quickly as they could. It was as if they felt like they didn't belong here. Maybe that's why it was so strange when a strong gust of wind suddenly threw the door open and left her framed at the entrance, with the moonlight sparkling behind her. The men in the bar exhaled collectively, and a low whisper filled the room. As she moved toward the bar, the men there moved to tables, and some left as she walked through the doorway. No one seemed to be staring at her, but every eye in the room was on her. The wind outside howled as someone tried to close the door against him. Jimmy looked at her. He didn't look away or try to hide, he just looked straight at her. She was normal, he thought. Her long hair was mousy-colored and stuck to the sides of her head as if she had just stepped out of the rain. But it was a clear evening. Maybe she was washing a boat or a car or something like that. She was extremely thin. There was something crazy in her eyes, he thought. He had never been with such a thin woman. He could tear her in half if he had too much sex with her. The thought that he had, Melissa waiting for him never crossed his mind. The thin woman walked straight towards Jimmy. She tilted her head to the side and looked at him strangely. Then she smiled at him. Her clothes looked like they had seen better days. They also seemed very old-fashioned. Even the way her long hair was cut seemed to go back 20 or 30 years or more. She was either very poor or a girl for the night, or both. Now Jimmy had a game he could play. He had a new game in mind. He wanted to see if he could get free sex from a girl for the night. He smiled broadly back at her. He even managed to notice that some of the men around him were crossing themselves. He was always amazed at how superstitious most sailors were. It probably had something to do with the women at the nautical bar. There was also one about women on board the ship, but he had Melissa on the Maitland several times and nothing bad happened. To hell with superstitions. He noticed that what he thought was some kind of necklace was actually several strands of aquatic plants that grow in lakes wrapped around her neck. It was a little strange. She was probably one of those green people with her save the planet bullshit. He reached out and grabbed her hand, dragging her towards the table. He trembled a little when she went with him. Her hand was cold as ice. She smelled strange. She smelled like something very familiar to him, but he couldn't remember what. "So what brings you here, baby?" he asked. "You," she replied. Jimmy smiled even wider. It would be easy, he thought. Within 10 minutes, she grabbed his hand and led him outside. She didn't mention the price, but they both knew why they were going there. Even as they tried to slam the door in the wind, Jimmy thought he heard someone say something about a witch. He laughed again at their stupid superstitions. "Where are we going, baby?" he asked. Even after having sex just 2 hours ago, Jimmy was already ready to start again. Variety is the spice of life, he thought. This one didn't have as big breasts as Melissa or as juicy an ass, but he felt like it would change his life. She had that slightly crazy look that all truly wild women have. She held his hand like a vice. It even hurt a little. She pulled him towards the docks as the wind picked up another notch around them. The river was calm just a minute ago, but the waters there began to rush, almost as if there was a storm brewing. The funny thing was that when he looked down the river in both directions, the water seemed calmer and calmer the further away from him it went. It was almost as if a storm or mini-storm was following him. He had heard of strange localized weather patterns and localized storms, but he never expected to see this. She pointed to a small boat that was rocking on the waves. "She eats." The boat was barely tied to a small pier, which was used by local fishermen who did not have their own boat. "There's no way I'm going to get in this little boat in this rough water," he said. "How scared are you?" she asked, smiling. "No, I just prefer to keep my head on my shoulders," he answered sharply. She smiled at him again, as if she liked the image. While she smiled, the weather calmed down almost instantly. The river barely moved, and the wind became much weaker, almost a warm breeze. "It was just a blip," she said. "They happen from time to time in the fall. But being a professional sailor, I know you've heard of them, right?" "Of course," Jimmy lied. "I guess if you're scared to get on the boat, we'll have to refuse," she said. "But I just love the way the waves and the movement of this boat make me feel. I would do almost anything on a boat. It's kind of my fantasy." In the moonlight, her smile was really hot, and the look in her eyes and that word, everything, stuck in Jimmy's mind. "Race to the boat!" he shouted. As Jimmy looked at the boat, a chill ran down his spine. It wasn't so much fear as it was a kind of anxiety, as if something was telling him not to do it. But all this passed when he saw a woman stretched out on the bow of a small boat. The woman wasn't beautiful, but she was just sexy. The strange thing was that Jimmy didn't actually see her get on the boat. He followed her a little behind, and then she just appeared in the boat, almost as if the wind had carried her to the boat. No, that was impossible. If he keeps thinking like that, he'll be just like those old men with all their lake legends nonsense. Jimmy climbed down into the boat from the small pier and was faced with the face of his future lover. She slowly ran her hands down her slender figure, stopping to caress the small mounds of her breasts that protruded from the front of her dress. Her hands continued down her sides until they reached her hips, and then they turned inward. Jimmy was so busy watching her sensual self-massage that he did not notice how a sudden gust of wind caused the mooring line to come loose, and the small boat, without oars or motor, headed into the dark, wide river. The woman did not wear underwear to prevent Jimmy from seeing all her charms. She was probably just some homely housewife looking for a little excitement. Jimmy could well have taken on the role of a pleasant memory to help her escape the boredom of her daily life. Jimmy crawled forward on the boat to get closer to it. He noticed that she was smiling. In fact, she said, "I fucked too much." Obviously, she wanted him. "Oh yes, Jimmy," she said. "I want you so much." It was strange. He didn't remember telling her his name, but he must have said it. "In fact, I wanted you before I even saw you," she said. It was funny. He usually said such stupid things to girls. He usually groomed them to get them into bed. Another strange thing. Her voice changed. At first, he thought that maybe it was just a voice, distorted by passion. The hormones that accompanied sexual arousal gave her voice a different sound. But it was a big difference. Her voice was not just a hiss, driven by passion. It sounded like the sound of the wind. "How could you want me before you saw me?" he asked. That fear has returned. His own voice sounded different than usual. Perhaps there was some strange atmospheric phenomenon changing both their voices. Jimmy looked back and noticed that the boat was far away on the river. If it happened during the day, it would be easier for them to call for help. But at night, at this time of year, they could freeze. Her words brought him back to reality. Jimmy was suddenly colder. The wind grew into a powerful gust, and the waves became larger and larger. Why was everything so calm just a few moments ago? "It was your beautiful, romantic words that woke me up and called me to come and find you," she said. "What did I say?" Jimmy asked. "Whatever it was, I'm sorry. I take back my words. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean anything by it. Oh, God, help me." The woman at the front of the boat simply laughed. "God's resting, Jimmy. It's just us here." The wind carried more strange sounds to Jimmy's ears. The same sad song played, as if only for him. The song says, "The lake never gives up its dead when the autumn storms come early." "Please give me a chance," Jimmy cried. His words were lost in the wind, but he knew she heard him. "What did I do? What did I say to wake you up?" "Oh, you'll remember, Jimmy," she said as the wind grew stronger. "Remember when you called me? You said it over and over again. Damn you, witch!" Jimmy realized that his life was over. The woman's face took on a completely different look. It was something very old that predated all other religions in the region. She was part of the wind. Actually, yes, she was the wind itself. The woman in the boat was the November witch. Jimmy felt his body being lifted high above the boat. He was suspended in the air among the fierce winds. The wind blew up the water, even the sand on the riverbank. The sand moved so fast that it began to peel the skin off his body. He screamed in pain as wounds and cuts appeared on his body. "Why are you screaming, Jimmy?" she asked. Her joy horrified him more than what he now understood. "Because it hurts like hell," he said. "Try to be treated like this yourself. I would rather drown." Even as he said this, Jimmy knew he had made a mistake. Suddenly, the wind died down and Jimmy plunged into the icy waters. Instantly, his cuts began to ache from the water when it touched them, but it was only a moment. The water was so cold that he began to freeze immediately. Jimmy tried to swim but couldn't. Then he felt something grab his ankle underwater. He opened his eyes and tried to look around to understand what he was caught on. His surprise came when he realized that he had not caught on to anything. The witch grabbed him by the ankle and dragged him to the bottom of the river. As Jimmy began to lose consciousness, he could barely make out the appearance of the woman holding him underwater. She seemed to be sitting calmly in front of him, on a rock at the bottom of the river, watching the life leave his cooling body. Jimmy felt his soul being pulled out of his body. He didn't just die, he was destroyed. His memories left him even as his body succumbed to the cold and lack of oxygen. As his lungs burned, he forgot about his childhood. As the water filled his pores, he forgot his name and his youth. It was the most terrible death imaginable. Jimmy could accept death, but shouldn't he have seen his life before his eyes? They didn't give him this. He forgot his name as his soul was absorbed into the witch, and suddenly she jerked. She looked back and moved with anger. With a movement almost too fast to see, she headed towards the surface and flew above it. Jimmy was forgotten in her response to what was bothering her. The warrior stood on the riverbank and shouted. He was dressed in black leather from head to toe. His eyes sparkled in the moonlight as he focused his gaze on the troubled waters. "Gash Gadino Gizis," he shouted again. "Come out and talk to me before I banish you." Suddenly, November broke through the surface of the water and floated in the air, held by the winds. She laughed when she saw the man. "What do you want, little man?" she asked, laughing. "I am very busy." "Go back to your place," shouted the warrior. "These are not your lakes. Let go of the one you are tormenting and return to your place before I banish you." November laughed and spun in the air. "You cannot banish me, little shaman, and if you continue to bother me, I will kill you. Your powers are puny compared to those your ancestors possessed. You are weakened by time spent with the Europeans and their descendants. Knowing my name only attracted my attention. Having my attention can be deadly." Even as she said this, Jimmy's body floated to the surface. The man in black leather noticed the body and looked at the witch. "Lucky for you, it's not the one I woke up to. He was just an appetizer. If you keep pestering me, I'll end you, shaman. Or should I say, the remnant of the shaman. Where is your proud war horse? All I see is a cart with a small horse in front. You have no power over me." The big man tried to say something, but the winds howled so loudly that his words were lost. The wind blew so hard that he could barely stand. The only thing he could do was watch the witch fly away from him in the wind. After she disappeared, he ran to the riverbank. The body was close enough for him to grab it and bring it closer to shore. He dragged the body to shore and began performing artificial respiration. He shouted, but there was no one to listen. He took out his iPhone and called 911. He continued performing CPR until paramedics arrived. The police came with them. He explained to them how he pulled the body out of the water, and they took control of the situation. He spoke to the police and simply told them that he had gone for a walk and stopped nearby to watch the boats passing on the river. As he approached the water, he saw the body and pulled it ashore. None of the police or paramedics had ever seen such wounds on the body. In addition to almost drowning, there were large cuts on the body that looked like scratches. They wrote down his name and phone number and said they might have questions for him later. Paramedics weren't sure the man would even survive. It appears he had spent too much time without oxygen when he was rescued. Even if he survives, he will likely have brain damage. John Lake shook his head. There was too much going on here. His great-grandfather was a powerful shaman. His grandfather was a powerful drunkard, and his father, who knew? He left shortly after John's mother gave birth to him. His knowledge of old customs and rituals was scanty. He was not a shaman. Damn, he was an engineer. He worked in quality control at Ford's Hamtramck plant. He was out of their league. He dusted off his leather jacket and headed to his car. "Pony cart," she called it. His Mustang GT produced over 450 horsepower. and the symbol on the front of his car was his totem of power. He would be glad to see one of his half-naked ancestors hurrying after him at the same speed. Ramona was waiting for Jimmy at Maitland Pier. He asked to give him 3 hours, but much more passed, and she began to worry. Perhaps Cliff was already home and noticed she was gone. It would be some time before he realized she was gone. She was lucky to have so many clothes that the few outfits she brought with her would not make an impression on her wardrobe. If she's lucky, he might think she was angry and went to stay with a friend until she was ready to talk to him. If she had thought about it, she could have called him and told him so. This might give her a few days to escape. But she threw away the phone he bought her so she couldn't be traced through it. She bought a burner phone, but didn't think calling him with it would be a good idea. Giving him the opportunity to track her was not in her best interest. With Cliff's money, if she doesn't stay in the shadows, he can easily find her. Ramona stirred. Man, it was cold here because of the water. She needed to start thinking about what she would do if Jimmy failed her. She was sure that he would agree to what she wanted. Most guys did whatever she wanted, no questions asked. Maybe she's getting old and losing her charm. A little voice in her head said, "That's even more of a reason why you should have stayed with Cliff. He loved you, fool. You could have been happy and had everything." She shook those thoughts away when she saw the flash of a lighter on the deck of the large ship. "Hello, sailor," she called. He looked at her, and Ramona saw that he was the same guy who had told Jimmy earlier that she was waiting for him. He looked at her and waved, then took a drag from his cigarette and headed towards the gangway. He climbed down the aluminum structure and was at her side in a few moments. "Damn, it's cold as hell in here," he began, and noticed that he had interrupted himself. "Why are you just standing here?" Ramona smiled at him, and Carl felt the blood drain from the large brain into the smaller one. "Oh, you're waiting for Jimmy again," he said. "He should be back any minute. We're leaving at dawn, but that should be plenty of time for you to, you know." He looked back at Ramona. She really was beautiful. "Hey, I probably shouldn't do this, but do you want to wait in Jimmy's cabin? The captain isn't back yet either. He probably won't show up until before we leave. His family lives here in town, and he likes to sleep in your own bed. Even though this ship is huge, we only have 29 people on board, so no one will ever be able to find you in Jimmy's cabin." "Oh, thank you very much," Ramona said. "I'll tell Jimmy how nice you were to me. Maybe we can find some way for me to thank you myself later." Carl loved this idea. He wondered if perhaps she was thinking of thanking him as he thanked her. If so, he was looking forward to it. One strange thing was that she didn't leave her bags in her car. He thought, why didn't she just leave them there? He walked her to Jimmy's cabin and headed off to play cards with the guys on his shift. Cliff Darden was driving fast, probably too fast. The events of the last few hours had left him confused. He let his heart rule his actions rather than his head. The meeting with the private investigator went about as badly as Cliff expected. Then things got worse. Cliff went to the private investigator's office and received the files he was expecting. They contained photographs and videotapes of Ramona in action. The detective warned him not to look at them. He told Cliff it was best to just present them to her as proof that he knew what she was doing. He could use them as leverage to get her to stop. An old private investigator warned him that if he looked at the photos or videos, it would be even harder to repair his marriage. No man wants to watch another guy or guys have sex with his woman if there's nothing wrong with him. That's one of the things that tells you there must be some kind of problem with carousers. Trust me, son. I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen relationships that were much worse than yours, and they not only came back and survived, but came out stronger from it. It may look bad now, but if you're willing to put in the effort, you can do it. Cliff didn't even bother telling the old man that he believed him. No matter what crimes Ramona committed, he was willing to give her a second chance, but only one. That's why he needed photos, videos, and a file. He intended to sit down with her when he got home, give her the file, and then lay out his terms for them to stay together. She knew that the prenuptial agreement they had signed would leave her with next to nothing if they divorced in less than 7 years, and only 2 had passed. The weirdest thing about it was that even if Ramona cheated on him, having her in his life was much better than the alternative. He simply had no choice. He loved her so much that the thought of life without her was painful. If that makes him a coward, so be it. Cliff returned home wondering if she actually had a reason to cheat. Maybe she was addicted to substances or something stupid like that. Maybe it was a gamble. Ramona obviously didn't know how much money they actually had. Oh God, let this be a gamble. He could pay off her debts, send her to counseling, and they could go back to their old happy life. "Ramona!" he shouted as he entered the house. He placed the file on the kitchen table. He had already rehearsed what he was going to say to her in the car on the way home. He was going to tell her to look at the photos, and maybe even the video on file. He was going to tell her that he had already seen them and had no desire to watch them again. No, it sounded better to say that if he saw them again, there would be no way for him not to kick her ass out of the house. No, it sounded like he was hitting a woman. If he saw them again, there would be no way for him to avoid throwing her out of the house. It sounded better. It sounded stern and controlled at the same time, without sounding like he was hitting a woman. The only thing wrong with his plan was that Ramona wasn't home. He called her several times and walked around the house, but she was not there. He sat down at the kitchen table with the files in front of him and pretended to be angry. Half an hour later, he looked at the clock. Almost midnight. Ramona had never been missing for so long before. He tried to call her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Throughout their marriage, Ramona had never been out of the house for more than 9 or 10 hours unless they were together. Something was wrong. He felt it. He tried calling several of her friends, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts. Cliff didn't know what to do. He sat down and watched TV and then fell asleep in front of it. A few hours later, he woke up and went upstairs to his bedroom. She still hadn't returned, and it was almost 3 in the morning. Then he noticed it. The painting that hid their wall safe was slightly open. He walked up to the painting and noticed that the safe was not locked. The safe was also empty. His first thought was that there had been a home raid or robbery. Maybe they took Ramona hostage. He went downstairs to his office. He opened a program on his computer that allowed him to view video footage from his home security system. They typically used the recordings not only to see if their home had been broken into, but also to see if contractors, workers, or anyone else working for them was stealing from them. The cameras were motion-activated to conserve hard drive space and stored video for 2 weeks. As he stared at the screen, he scrolled back to the last movements in the house before he arrived. The last image he saw was of Ramona leaving the house. She was alone and moving quickly. He scrolled further and saw Ramona removing the contents of the safe and taking a couple of bags containing her clothes and personal items. Tears rolled down Cliff's cheeks. Why is she leaving him? Doesn't she know that he loves her? If she needed money and other things she took, she could have them. She didn't have to leave. Perhaps she thought she had no choice. Maybe she knew that he found out that she was deceiving him. Maybe she thought he was just going to throw her out into the street with nothing. It had to be like this. Cliff needed to find her, but how? Then he remembered the tracking chip in her car. It was a joke. Oh God, how they fought over that damn car. She wanted a Lexus like her friends. Cliff refused and bought her a Cadillac XRS convertible. Cliff insisted on buying American cars. Ramona stomped her feet and refused to ride him. For 3 weeks, the beautiful car just sat in their driveway. Finally, one of Ramona's friends, Lexus, broke down and they had to take the Cadillac or miss their appointment at the beauty salon. Ramona almost took Cliff by force when he returned home that evening. She loved the car and all her friends were jealous of her. It took a few months, but by the end of the year, all of Ramona's close friends were driving Cadillacs. Cliff called the chip search service and told the woman on the phone that his wife had gone shopping and literally lost her car. Ramona, leaving her keys in the car and calling the company to unlock it so often that she lost her car or forgot where she parked it, didn't seem too unlikely. The woman gave Cliff the location and he jumped into his Mustang, heading towards the embankment. As he pulled into the parking lot closer to the location, Cliff saw Ramona's bright red Cadillac. He ran to the car and knew it was all over. The car doors were open. The keys were on the seat along with the envelope. He opened the envelope and read the note. "Cliff, don't miss me or be upset. I wish I could tell you I'm sorry or say some kind words to make you feel better. But the truth is that in the end, it would give you a false sense of hope and would only make things harder for you in the long run. It's not because you found out I cheated on you, so don't think that's what it's about. Don't torture yourself trying to figure out what you did wrong and why I stopped loving you. What you need to realize is that our entire marriage was a lie. I never started loving you because I never started. From the moment we first met, you were just a way for me to hide from the police and everyone who was looking for me. When we met, I planned to stay married to you just long enough for the fever to subside a little. I thought it would be 6 months, a year at best. If it's any consolation, you were so loving and just God like a puppy that after the first year I decided to stay longer just to get as much money out of you as possible. Unfortunately, you figured it out before I could. Also, don't worry about cheating, darling. We were never compatible in bed. You are too affectionate for me. Not every woman wants her husband to make her tender love. Some of us like it rough. Your style just didn't fit. I'm sure that someday you will find yourself a boring girl and make her happy as hell, and even have a house full of children, but I'm just not that girl. If I have a regret, it's that I know your poor heart will break. Trust me, Cliff. You need someone to deceive you. You're too gullible and simply too kind to survive without learning a few painful lessons about the real world. My only regret is that I didn't get to take more of your money with me. The letter was signed, Ramona. She added P.S. later. Ramona isn't even my real name, and although I won't miss you, I will need this car. Cliff just fell and found himself sitting next to the car, crying his eyes out. He wasn't sure how long he sat there. It could be minutes or hours. But then things got weird. The first sign that something was wrong was the wind picking up. Cliff didn't care. He didn't know what to do or where to go. He never thought his life with Ramona would end. He was ready and willing to forgive her for any crime. The stupidest thing about it was that even after reading the letter, he was still ready. Then the lampposts began to blink. The wind blew so hard that the signs bent in front of it, and that's all, whatever was not attached to the ground was thrown about the street. Cliff looked towards himself and saw her. It was a strange-looking woman, and she was looking at him carefully. She said something to him, but because of the wind, he could not hear her words. As if sensing his thoughts, she shook her head from side to side, and the wind died down. It had to be a coincidence, Cliff thought. "You are a man," said the woman. Cliff simply nodded his head. "Hardly," he said quietly. "I don't understand," said the woman. "I've never serviced a man before. I'm supposed to make life better for someone whose heart was broken by cheating. Oh, sometimes I deal with someone who's just a real asshole for fun. But I don't understand it. You gotta be a woman to feel that kind of pain. Men don't feel that kind of emotional pain if their dog dies, their team loses a championship, or someone scratches their damn vehicle. Oh, sometimes they have problems with kids too, but I've never seen this before." She looked at him with curiosity. "Say something. Tell me your story," she said. Cliff was too stunned to say or do anything. The woman made a gesture, and the wind, increasing to hurricane force, picked up Cliff and carried him into the air above the river. He then sank into the icy water before he could even breathe. As Cliff descended through the water, he realized that he simply didn't care. Without Ramona in his life, there was no point in continuing. He felt someone grab him underwater and didn't even try to struggle. November grabbed Cliff and placed her icy hands on his head. She needed his memories, and she erased them when they appeared. She erased all memories of Ramona. When Cliff woke up, he had no memories of Ramona. November felt a presence above her. Now a police car was patrolling the street just beyond the shore. She blew the sign right in front of that car, forcing it to drive onto the beach to avoid the sign. The policewoman got out of the car and saw Cliff struggling to avoid drowning in the icy water. November smiled as the woman entered the water and pulled him to shore, and he would be better now. But she had things to do. Before she began scanning her target, November was suddenly drawn further downriver. As she rose above the water, she noticed that the pull was stronger this time. There he was, the same damn insect that had annoyed her before. Dressed again in black leather, John Lake held an old war mace in his hands. This time he said two of her names. That's why the call was stronger. He still couldn't control it, but he was getting smarter. He didn't realize that she now had two spirits. One was the wind of the Great Lakes, and the second was what was once human. A great tragedy and the abuse of her power led to her spirit merging with the former owner of this body. November now had to correct a mistake similar to the one her body made every year. The last one this little shaman tried to save was only a piece. She hit Jimmy for pure pleasure, but also because he insulted her and challenged her to a fight. Now this little shaman was threatening her cause. If he ever figured out the third name, he might not banish her forever, but he might send her to bed until next year. November had no idea what might happen in this case. It would be his fault, she warned him. Which November? John Lake said, holding the mace in front of him. Also known in the language of my people as Genesis, I banish you forever to the lakes of your sisters. From now on, and forever, you can only exist in Erie, Ontario, Michigan, Huron, and Superior. Go and never leave these waters again. Feel my power. John made a gesture with his warrior's mace. He felt the pulse of great power emanating from the mace of his ancestors. November did feel a slight tingling sensation. This irritated her. She made her own gesture, and John Lake rose into the air near where she was floating. Feel the wall, she hissed. Hurricane-force winds blew John Lake back at nearly 90 by. November saved his life at the last moment by turning him in the air to prevent his head from hitting the wall. Even so, he broke 7 ribs, both hips, and his left arm. He stumbled, unconscious, to the ground. November carefully sat down on the grass next to him. She didn't understand why she spared him. There was something about him. She made another gesture, and a gentle, cool wind woke him up. He looked at her in horror. I let you retain the use of your right hand so you could write me a thank you note. She grinned. The next time you try to control me, you will die. But I'm left-handed, John whispered. Judge me, said November, going to the river. Her mind was already trying to find someone. Stay or go, Janet Charles thought, as she looked at the sleeping man in the hospital bed next to her. She sat in the chair next to his bed, keeping an eye out for signs that he might wake up. He was handsome, but he seemed to have absolutely no idea what was going on. Only 2 hours ago, she fished him out of the river. He was shivering from the cold and was completely discouraged. He didn't remember how he ended up in the water. He just repeated that he was driving around the area looking for, and then everything went black. It seemed to him that he did not remember what exactly he was looking for. When she radioed the message, the detective assigned to the case kept her informed. Detective Bernie Gorka was new to her department, but not new to the force. He was a good cop and gave her all the information about the man she pulled out of the river. Janet absorbed all this information. Even though she wasn't part of the investigation, the captain didn't care if she spent time in the hospital until the case was over. There were too many strange things in this case. Janet's problem was that the more information she received about the alleged victim, the more she wanted to know. She spent hours just sitting and thinking about him while he slept. Gorka's report filled in most of the blanks, but several questions still remained. His name was Clifford Darden. Apparently, he was married, but when they tested him and his wife, according to standard procedure, several interesting facts emerged. The facts about him weren't very interesting. He was some kind of software engineer. He was apparently very good at his job and was willing to prove it. He wasn't rich like Bill Gates, but losing $1 million or 2 wouldn't ruin him. He had no criminal record, and other than the occasional speeding ticket, he had never been in trouble with the law. Even these speeding fines were paid immediately, and he was even very polite to the officers who issued the fines. Janet saw his car at the scene. Cars like this probably came with the promise of a fine or 3. Perhaps this was spelled out in the contract he signed upon purchase. Anyway, When they checked his cell phone, they learned that he was in the area looking for his wife's car. They also checked her car, and one of the fingerprints they obtained from the car positively confirmed that Margaret Ann McGillicuddy was Ramona Cruz, also known as Ramona Darden. Even worse was the letter she left for the poor man. When Janet read this letter, it tore her heart. What kind of woman is it that leaves such a letter to a man who loved her as much as this guy? Even the stern men, polished in battle, felt pity for him in action. Most of them couldn't look at him. It was like interviewing a person with a serious illness. It wasn't the disease that scared you, or even the fact that they had it. It was that there was a possibility that you could be in their position. The police had statistics on failed relationships and broken marriages. Any of these guys could be in the same position as Darden. Janet herself was no stranger to bad relationships. Her last boyfriend she lived with was a little tougher than usual. The fact that she was a police officer is clear was a blow to his male ego. So there were several arguments and fights. The last time they came to a fight, it started with him just pushing her and quickly turned serious. Her self-defense training helped even the odds. But in the end, his 193-centimeter frame simply overwhelmed her 162-centimeter frame. She had to take out her gun and make threats to get him to back down. This was almost a year ago. He never dared return to pick up his things. 6 months later, she donated all of his clothes and personal belongings to the Salvation Army. Since then, she has been dating free and abstinence by choice. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she simply could not understand why, at 32, she was still not married. She was attractive. She was slim with nice legs and a great ass. Or so she was told. She had short, curly brown hair and beautiful gray eyes. Okay, she was absent on breast day, but it wasn't her fault. All of her friends were either already married or divorced and working on a second marriage. Some of them already had children too. Janet wasn't even very picky when it came to men. She just wanted someone to love her and treat her well. She didn't ask Brad Pitt. She just wanted a regular, everyday guy who wanted to be with her. "Where I am?" asked the man on the bed next to her. His voice brought Janet out of her thoughts. "Mr. Darden, you are in the hospital," she said. "Remember how you got here?" "Yes," he said. "I was in the river, and a very beautiful policewoman pulled me out of there." Janet's face turned the brightest possible red. "It was you, wasn't it?" he asked. She nodded her head and tried not to smile. "What else do you remember?" she asked. "Do you remember how you got into the water or why? What were you doing on the embankment in general?" "There were almost hurricane-force winds there," he said. "I think I lost my balance and fell into the river. But I don't remember why I was there. Wait, I was looking for something or someone, but I don't remember what." "We think you were looking for your wife. Apparently she left you and took a lot of your money with her. We read the note she left for you. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but she was damn mean." "You deserve so much better," Janet said. Cliff Darden looked at her curiously. "Officer, I'm not married. I don't have a wife," he said. "Perhaps you are working on too many cases and have confused me with someone else." Later that day, Darden was examined by both doctors and psychologists. He was diagnosed with a very mild form of hypothermia. This was probably due to hypothermia from being submerged in the river. Apart from this, there was nothing wrong with him, either physically or mentally. The problem was that he simply couldn't remember anything about his wife or the life they led. In fact, he was married, although the marriage could easily be annulled if he simply appeared before a judge in any state and asked for an annulment. The marriage was fraudulent from the very beginning. His wife lied about everything on the marriage certificate. She also got married under false premise. He struggled to comprehend this when he was shown copies of the documents. Janet became a regular visitor at his bedside. Since he liked Janet and Cliff had no relatives in the area, she began doing various things for him, such as contacting his lawyers. Psychologists also believed that she should be the one to inform him about his wife and help him figure out what to do with her and his legal status. He thought about moving to a separate room, but could not think of a reason for this. The big guy in the bed next to him was in a medically induced coma. He was found in the same area as Cliff, at almost the same time. He was a big Indian with almost every bone in his body broken. The next day, they were going to try to wake him up if he didn't wake up on his own. Ramona woke up and looked out the window of a small room on the ship. She heard the sound of footsteps, and then the door opened. "Jimmy," she called cautiously. "No, this is Carl," he said. "We need to talk. It's 5 in the morning and I have news for you. We need to get you off this ship. The captain is back and we're going to sail in half an hour." "Where's Jimmy?" she asked. "Jimmy's dead," he said. "The police came by about 2 hours ago. I knew you had nothing to do with it since you were here sleeping around the time it happened. They didn't ask you any questions either, so I didn't say anything. We need to get you out of here." "But I can't," she began. She took his hand carefully. "They're not looking for me because of Jimmy, but there are people who are looking for me. Jimmy was going to let me go to Wisconsin on this ship so I could start over. My husband is rich, and he has a lot of people looking for me. If they find me and bring me back to him, he will beat me again. The last time I tried to escape from him, he beat me so badly that I could not leave the house for almost a month. Even when all the bruises had healed, there was pain for a long time after this. I'll do whatever you ask. Please just hide me." Carl listened to Ramona's story. He also looked at her. Carl was older, smarter than Jimmy. He didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for Ramona. In fact, when he looked at her, he realized that she was lying through her teeth. "Take off your clothes," he said. Ramona looked at him and knew he was serious. If she wanted to stay on board the ship, she would have to do whatever he wanted. Carl was not like Jimmy. She wouldn't be able to get her way with him as easily. He wasn't like Cliff, either. There was no love in his eyes when he looked at her. She took off her clothes and stood naked in front of him. She flexed her breasts and arched her back to make her ass stand out as well. "Come here and kneel," he ordered. Ramona did what he wanted. For her, it was a matter of survival. She was sure that Cliff had already found her car and the note, and the police were probably looking everywhere for her. She needs to stay on this ship at all costs. "I'll be back after we leave the dock," he said, "and I can bring a couple of friends with me. If you know what's good for you, you better do whatever I say, no questions asked, until we get to our next destination." Ramona nodded and tried to cover herself. The only thought she had in her head was that she really should have stayed with Cliff. John Lake woke up in the hospital. Almost his entire body was bandaged or in a cast. Everything he could think about hurt. It was as if he had been run over by a car. He knew he should be grateful to be alive at all. He talked to his great-grandfather yesterday. The old man gave him a powerful totem. The war club had great power, as it was supposed to, and he used both names for the autumn storm elemental. He used both the Ojibwa version of her name and the name that Great Lakes sailors gave her. This should have worked, but it didn't work. A day has passed, and it is now Halloween. Tonight, the veil between all dimensions was thinner than ever, and all spirits, especially those as ancient and powerful as the wind elemental, were at their most powerful. He missed. His best chance to stop November from doing what she wanted to do was gone. He felt in his bones that the man she had killed the first time, as she had said, was just an appetizer. She wanted to kill someone else, and there was no way he could resist it. Now he realized that he was not a very good shaman. Yes, he drove his Mustang and wore black leather, but when it came down to it, November ate him and threw him away. She did it the same way her sister, Gitchagumi, did with the ships. It was like a line from that shipwreck song. This good ship was a bone to chew when the strong winds of November came early. The only thing that saved him was location and whim. He met a witch on the Detroit River. Her power, although great, was not as powerful as it would have been on one of the Great Lakes. It would be especially strong on Lake Superior. This was another line from a song and also a legend of his people about the Great Lakes. A legend lives from the Chippewa onwards about a great lake they call Gitchagumi. Superior, they said, never gives up his dead when the autumn winds come early. Both the song and the legend of his people said almost the same thing. If November is chasing someone or something, and if he catches them in Lake Superior, There will be casualties. There could probably be a lot of them. John knew that the only other reason he was still alive was because of the witch's whim. The first time they met, she simply smiled and warned him. This time, she could kill him. She even joked about leaving him with one arm to use. John decided to simply pray for the spirits of all the people on the lakes, because there was nothing he could do to save them. There were things here that just didn't add up. November. Witch was the name they gave to early fall storms on the Great Lakes. When and how did she get the body? Why did she need this? John's thoughts were interrupted by the click of high heels on the hospital floor. The woman walked past his bed and approached the man in the bed next to him. She was beautiful. He got lucky. John had been in several relationships, but never with a woman who loved him the way this one apparently loved the guy in the next bed. He tried to sleep, but ended up eavesdropping on their conversation. He knew he shouldn't do this, but damn, he didn't have a TV or radio. They were talking about some woman who hurt a guy. He was supposedly completely in love with her, and she tore his heart out. The man continued to say that he didn't remember her at all. When the woman or the doctor with her showed him the photograph, his face showed no emotion. He just didn't remember her. Even under hypnosis, he could not remember anything about her or ever seeing her. Under hypnosis, however, he described another woman. He described her as thin, with unkempt hair. He also claimed that she floated in the wind and blew him into the river. The psychologist felt that the mixture of drugs used for hypnosis was too strong, and he was describing a dream rather than real life. But John's bones began to grow cold, and terror gripped his heart. He knew the man was telling the truth. When the psychologist left, John saw the woman, who was supposed to be a police officer, arranging blankets around the man as he fell asleep. She shook her head sadly and whispered, "If only." Then she leaned over and kissed him very tenderly on the cheek. As she straightened up, she met John's gaze and realized that he had been awake and had been watching her for some time. Before she could think of anything to say in her near-panic state, John calmed her down. "Don't worry," he said. "I was there. I won't say a word." The woman nodded in gratitude and left the room. John noticed that she had come to see a man again, even if she was not on duty and not wearing a uniform. Ramona laid her head down on the dirty mattress on Jimmy's small bed. At the rate this ship was going, she would probably be dead before they reached Wisconsin. It was Halloween night and the crew was celebrating. For the captain and officers, this meant a small portion of rum and some creepy stories about strange events that happened on the lakes. For the other 20 people, this meant that they took turns coming here and having it. At first they came one at a time, but as they became bolder, they began to come in pairs and trios. A couple of hours passed before Ramona learned the truth. Carl charged his shipmates to have sex with her. He traded it. He made a lot of money from it. At $50 a session, Carl has already earned over $1,000 from her. At this rate, when they got to Wisconsin, he would be much richer, and her body would be too sore to move. The worst part was that he didn't have sex with her after the first time she was with him. When she asked him why he wasn't taking his turns, he just looked at her like she was crazy. "Do you have any idea what diseases I could get with a woman like you?" he asked. "It's just not worth the risk. Plus, the best sex comes from someone who cares about you. Not just some easy sex that any guy is willing to have. Who wants that?" Once again, she was left with one thought that had been tormenting her since she left home yesterday. "I should have stayed with Cliff. That man loved me. We could have done this." She buried the thought. Her whole life was like this. It was too late to change anything. There were only two types of people in the world. There were those who took and those who were taken. When she was younger, one of her favorite bands was the girl group Poison Dollies. Yes, they spelled the title differently than Def Leppard. Either way, they had a song that she based her life on. "Love is for fools," the song sang. She described her entire ideology. The 2 years she spent with Cliff had been a short fantasy, not her life. 2 more men had just appeared and were marching into the room as if they owned it. "Damn it," she thought. "I'm taking a break." At midnight, November appeared over the waters of Superior. She stretched out her mind, and the wind touched every boat on the lake. The one she was looking for would be here soon. She felt the large boat rise out of the water at almost 15 knots. She had just passed Black Bay on the American side of the lake. She has not yet entered the lake itself. Yes, but she already felt the anger and pain that her goal brought. With just one mental touch of the wind, she increased its strength and coldness. Strong winds on the lake caused the waves to increase. November smiled. As her winds caressed the large ship, she felt the lives of the men on board. Whether the ship would survive that night and whether any of its crew would die depended on them this time. A radio operator on board the Maitland contacted the National Weather Service. His name was Paul Pittman, and he was worried. The waves rose a little. They were a little more excited than he expected, but he had a bad feeling about it. The report he received from the Weather Service predicted warmer temperatures and smaller waves. He radioed a friend on the ship who was somewhere else on Superior. The lake was huge, so huge that sometimes it would rain on one part of the lake, but not on the whole lake. After talking with his friend, his bad feeling intensified. Temperatures and wave heights near the other ship were exactly as predicted for the night. Of course, he could not say anything to the captain or other officers. They would laugh at him and he would become the butt of jokes for years to come. An hour later, Pittman called the captain. It was unnecessary. Temperatures dropped so low and winds rose so high that the ship actually moved through the water at half the speed its engines could. Additionally, the size of the waves has nearly doubled since they entered Superior. It was something the ship could handle, but it was scary. Pittman looked up when one of the senior sailors asked permission to come to the bridge. It was Isaac Turner. He worked at Maitland for over 10 years. His face was green with fear. "We'll be fine, Ike," said the captain, Gordon Song. He was a Canadian who worked on the Great Lakes for almost 40 years. "I've seen hundreds of storms like this, and so has Maitland. I know what you're thinking, but it's just a blip. Go back to your cabin, get drunk, and it'll be over before you know it." Ike saluted and nodded. He knew the captain was lying, but he was a good sailor and always obeyed orders, or pretended to obey. He also understood that the captain was not lying out of dishonesty. He lied because he needed to keep the crew's confidence in the ship and its captain to survive this as high as possible. If the captain seemed scared, what would happen to the rest of the crew? It was a necessary lie. Sounds like what they call noble deception in medicine. If a doctor told you that an injection would be very painful, most people would never allow someone to give them an injection. Likewise, if the captain told the crew that he was afraid or started spreading old superstitions, who knows what might have happened. But Isaac had never seen such waves on the Great Lakes and in particular on this ship. It was like being on a goddamn American city ride, and a ship of this size should have been breaking the waves, not rising and falling on them. Everywhere he looked, he could tell that every man knew, as did the captain too, it was the Witch of November, come to steal. Isaac saw people who usually stood on the deck at night and watched the water even in the stormiest times, now sat in their cabins with fearful expressions on their faces. Icky knew that by morning this team would either have their own story to tell their grandchildren, or they would be part of a story told by others. As Isaac carefully left the bridge, a strong gust of wind threw him against the beams. He clung on for a split second and was then swept off his feet. Suddenly, an even stronger gust of wind caught the large man and held him in the air. He returned gently to his feet and looked around. This was strange, he thought. Jimmy would appreciate this story. Of course, he would never believe her. Jimmy didn't believe in anything, Isaac. That was his problem, a voice said from behind Isaac. He turned around and looked. There, at the railing where she and Jimmy had watched the kids wave at them in Detroit, stood a slender woman. "Come and talk to me, Isaac," she said calmly. All the shaking movements of the ship didn't seem to affect her. She stretched out her arms and her long hair fluttered in the wind. She smiled as if she had no fear. At that moment, the ship began to descend down the side of the giant wave. Isaac couldn't tell if the rain was falling horizontally or if the wind was simply blowing streams of water across the deck. In any case, the rain almost froze him as soon as it touched him. Why doesn't the woman freeze? She has almost no clothes. And why isn't she afraid? Isaac was scared out of his mind, and this was his ship. Why is this woman not afraid? Then he realized. Recognition led to awareness. Fear gave way to humility. Isaac walked to the railing next to her. "It's you, right?" he asked. "I'm afraid so," November smiled. You, he began. "Yes, Isaac," she smiled. "I came earlier this time. You know what that means, right? But it doesn't have to be a bad thing." Isaac took a deep breath and looked at the woman standing next to him. Something inside him told him that the thought running through his head would not be reasonable. "Even if I let you throw me overboard, Isaac, I won't die. I can't die like you say, because I'm not really alive, and by God, I'd be absolutely furious when I came back." "Up. I was hoping you were smarter than that." "What do you want me to do?" Isaac asked. "Go and call your captain." November grinned. Isaac slowly walked towards the bridge. This time, he burst into the room with a look of absolute fear on his face. All the officers in the room turned and looked at him. "What are you doing, Ike?" Pittman shouted. "You know that this is wrong." "What happened, Ike?" asked the captain. "Are you okay?" "No, Captain," Isaac shouted. "This is a real witch. Every sailor worth his salt knows what these storms are called and why," said Captain Song. "Pull yourself together before I send you to the cabin into custody." "No, Captain," shouted Ike. "It's really her, and she wants to talk to you. She's here on this damn ship, and if you don't talk to her, we won't make it until morning." "What the hell are you talking about?" asked the captain. "The November Witch is not a person. It is a name for storms. Tell that crap to that woman standing at the railing in the almost hurricane-force winds, like she just went out for a walk on a sunny afternoon in goddamn Florida," Ike shouted. "If you think I'm wrong, just come out there. You can always lock me up or fire me. Just go and talk to her." Realizing that he might have gone a little overboard, Ike added, "Sir," and hastened to raise his hand in urgent greeting. Captain Song walked to the cabinet on the back wall of the bridge. He opened the cabinet and issued rifles to each of his officers. One of the men, Tom Dooley, a big fighter, gave up his rifle. "It's about a girl, right?" he asked. Isaac nodded. "I don't need a gun," Dooley said. "If I have to, I'll just beat her ass and throw her overboard." The captain, followed by 7 men armed with rifles, and big Tom Dooley, who was slobbering just thinking about strangling a woman and throwing her into the stormy waters, left the bridge. Ike took this opportunity to leave here. "What are you doing on my ship?" asked Captain Song. The woman standing at the railing, Ike said, turned to look at the captain. Her expression spoke of her amusement. "Who are you?" the captain barked. "What game are you playing? Why are you standing on my deck half-naked in the middle of this damn storm?" "You already know who I am, Captain Song. Don't act like you don't understand. Your ship might be a little wet." She smiled. "Mr. Dooley, put this woman in the cabin until we figure out what's going on here," the captain shouted. Tom Dooley approached the woman with murderous intent. When he raised his fists to try to grab her, she raised an eyebrow and held up one delicate finger. A sudden gust of wind lifted the large man into the air. He hung there, floundering and screaming, while the others looked on in shock. "You really don't need men like that on your ship, Captain," November said. As if it were an afterthought, she waved her hand and Dooley flew from the ship and fell almost 100 yards away into the icy waters. There was not even a cry to mark his departure. The other men, even before the captain could say anything, raised their rifles and fired. The men looked at her, waiting, or rather hoping, for her to fall. There was a long silence. No blood flowed from her wounds. She didn't fall or even lose her balance. She simply looked at the captain and started talking again. "I tried to do it in a good way," she said. "It seems you won't let me. You have entered my sister's waters, and we received you as guests. But not anymore. Before this evening is over, Captain, I'll get what I want one way or another. Now we'll do it my way." The woman raised her arms and flew into the air on another of those gusts of wind that the captain suddenly realized she had control over. He, now realizing his mistake, saw the waves become even higher. The waves began to look like mountains of water rising from the lake. He realized that his ship could not survive in such waves. A wave, almost 50 feet high, was heading straight towards him. This wave will be the end for the ship and all the people on it. "What do you want?" the captain asked quietly. Instantly, the spasm of the wave stopped, and the lake became calm. Where the waters had just boiled excitedly at almost Arctic temperatures, the lake calmed down, with a barely perceptible cold wind. "I want that bitch," November said. "Only now I want her for several reasons." She pointed a finger at one of the bullet wounds on her forehead. "Which bitch?" asked the captain. "There are no women on my ship. No offense." "No hard feelings," she said. "Bring your entire crew on deck." Captain Song ordered his officers to go around the entire ship and bring in the crew. There was no need to explain to them what was happening. Most of them already knew, thanks to Ike. There were whispers and cheers as they came out. More than one person covered their mouth when they accidentally mentioned a witch. Most of the brave men hid along the sides as far from November as they could. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing everyone, "sorry to bother you. This is new to me. I'm not used to dealing with people. Usually I just sink your little boats and drown you. So you can all leave here tonight, safe and sound. I have no intention of harming you. If you don't have to. I only want this woman. But hear me, either she leaves or all of you." "There is no woman on my ship," the captain threatened. "I'll give you 10 minutes to make your decisions," November said. The captain gathered with his crew. There was a heated conversation going on there. "I will not die and leave my family without a breadwinner for the sake of some bitch," one sailor shouted. "What bitch?" asked the captain. "The one who's been sleeping with everyone below deck since we left Michigan," another crew member said. "Carl charged us money for her services," said another. "We cannot in good conscience hand over an innocent woman to this creature," the captain said. "That would not be a Christian thing to do." "This bitch is not innocent," one crew member observed with a frown. "Besides, Captain, the witch is not a Christian." "I'm bored," November cried. As she spoke, the wind increased, and the waves became even larger in the blink of an eye. Before the captain could answer her, the 3 men ran below deck and returned a few moments later, dragging Ramona with them, screaming anxiously. "No!" shouted the captain. "You can't take her away. I won't be part of this." Miss Witch, ma'am," one member said politely. "Would you like the captain to join you?" November seemed to ponder his question for just a moment. The captain came to his senses and asked if November would like the woman to be placed in the boat. November looked at the woman carefully and cautiously. Ramona was more robust than the body she now occupied. The blonde with beautiful eyes had a more streamlined figure and strong legs. She decided to take her as she was. "I'll take her as she is," November said. Before Ramona could protest, a gust of wind blew her off the deck and into the air. November rose behind her. "For this night and for the rest of this season, no harm will come to this ship anywhere on the lakes. Moreover, if any of you should go overboard even in the roughest waters, he will be brought safely ashore unharmed," she said in a voice like a whistling wind. She then disappeared, leaving the crew wondering if it was all a dream. Ramona ended up in the water next to another woman. She tried to swim, but the cold robbed her of feeling in her limbs. She inhaled once and held it as long as she could after diving. She felt hands touching her and opened her eyes in shock to see another woman next to her. She had no intention of seducing this woman. The woman grabbed her head cruelly, and memories flashed before Ramona's eyes. She saw all the time she spent deceiving people, depriving them of their property. She remembered every lie she told and every person she ever deceived or stole from. The most painful memories for her were the most recent. Looking at herself with Cliff, She could practically see his love for her as a physical presence. She couldn't believe she had wasted such a precious feeling. At that moment, she realized what a hateful creature she was and how much better the world would be without her. A thought came into her mind. It was as if someone else was talking to her. She opened her eyes and saw that it was another woman. 36 years ago, I was you. That's why I am who I am now, to rid the world of creatures like you. Ramona nodded in her shame and pain at how she had spread her life. At that moment, she wanted to die. And she died. It was not an easy death, nor a painless one. The icy laco water poured into her lungs. Her alveoli, filled with water instead of oxygen, could not function. Her body twisted in icy agony, and her soul left her flesh. 2 female bodies surfaced. The wind of the whirlwind came around them faster and faster. One body was releasing lake water at an alarming rate. Water has been the only thing holding the body together since November 1975. Without water, the body quickly died and disintegrated into dust. The wind spirit that was November took on a new, much sexier body. It stretched out and curved over the surface of the lake, and the waders became calm. She had no urgent matters, and sleep was calling her. A huge chasm opened in the water. Not now, November said quietly. I have one more thing to do, a feeling November hasn't felt in over 30 years. Aboard the Maitland, Paul Pittman answered the radio message. He then switched to his computer and sent an email attaching photos. He was ready for this. Immediately after the women left the ship, the captain swore them all to secrecy about what happened. He also informed them that security cameras are always installed at the pier. He was sure that sooner or later the authorities would realize that the woman was on board his ship. He collected some of the photographs and/or videos his team took of the woman during her time on board. It was them that Paul sent to both the Coast Guard and the Detroit police. He told them that the woman had been found aboard the Maitland shortly after they left port. She was partying with the crew and got very drunk at a Halloween party. They sent photos and videos proving her actions were completely voluntary. Unfortunately, her drinking caused her to fall overboard. At that time, they were still looking for her. They called the Coast Guard, and a boat was on its way to help them search for the body. It was a terrible accident, but nothing more. Since the captain did not know that the woman was on board his ship, he only received a warning to be more careful about his ship. It also turned out that Tom Dooley disappeared during a storm and strong waves. Tom's body was also not found. It was very strange, but the Coast Guard inspected the ship several times from stem to stern. They also sent divers and search parties for 2 weeks, but none of the bodies were ever found. The police closed their case, and the Coast Guard did too after exhausting the search for bodies. All vessels in the Great Lakes region were on alert for several weeks, but there was no need to worry. That year did not bring November storms. They occurred in only one small region, much earlier than usual, and everyone concerned knew that the bodies would never be discovered. Gichigumi never gave up her death when November came early. Sailors on the lakes always remained vigilant before the gales of November. 3 days after Halloween, Cliff Darden got into his Mustang and drove home. He knew that this was his home again now, and not just the empty house it had been when he first left the hospital. Strange things happen sometimes, and this one was the best. Even though it had only been a few days, Cliff knew it was right. It was something he needed to fill the void in his life. When he opened the door, Janet rushed towards him. She hugged him as if her life depended on it. Her life may not have depended, but her heart did. It was very early in their relationship, but Janet was confident that Cliff was the man who would give her everything she wanted. A home, someone who would love her and treat her well, accept her love in return, and maybe children someday. This was what Janet wanted most. Cliff kissed her, and it felt good. Very good. In his reverie, his mind was filled with the thought that he had done this before with someone else, but this time, it felt right. Almost 2 months later, John Lake left the hospital. He could barely limp. Doctors told him not to exert himself for some time, but he would make a full recovery. He still had several weeks of physical therapy ahead of him, but over the past 7 weeks he had worked hard on his recovery with one goal in mind. The day after Halloween, when the investigation into the mysterious missing memory of his neighbor's wife was closed and the policewoman assigned to his case somehow became his girlfriend, another strange event occurred. A few hours after Cliff and Janet left the hospital, and John was in the grip of another round of pain as his bones began to heal, he had a visitor. At first he thought it was a dream. She was a beautiful blonde with big breasts. She leaned over John and kissed him with her cold lips, and all his pain went away. "We started with what is wrong," she whispered. "I'm sorry I offended you, but you made me angry. When you leave here, if you want to see me again, come to the water and call me by name." She must have mistaken him for someone else. No woman ever hurt John. Maybe it was a dream. John parked his Mustang and walked out of the hospital. He had to use his credit card to pay for parking because the car had been there for so long. He really didn't expect it to start, but the Mustang's engine started immediately, without even wheezing. John wondered where he should go. He just started driving. He rode back north to the places where his people still had small settlements. These were not reservations, just small towns where some people lived who still believed in the old ways. He drove past the town, waving to several familiar people he had known since childhood. "Hey, John, are you back?" Several people asked warmly. "I don't know," he replied. "Maybe." John got out of the car and sat on the bench, looking out over the great water. "November," he said. His voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. He laughed to himself. "It must have been funny for me to think about it." While he was laughing, the water began to swell and a figure jumped out of the water. She landed and walked towards him, her body drying up as she approached. "It took you a long time," she said. "I just got out of the hospital today," he said. "Do you like the new look?" she asked. He nodded his head and took her into his arms. "Just try not to piss me off," he smirked. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.